All right, let's get started. Thank you, Eric. Hello, world. Welcome, programmers. Welcome, music lovers. Welcome to Coda. We are streaming live from Boston, Massachusetts. It is a Sunday evening. I hope everybody has their coffee. Well, my name is Joseph Parzel. I am your host tonight. On guitar, we have Eric Gaudette. Here we are, episode 1 of season 1 of Coda. Again, I'm Joseph Parzel. I'm a software developer and an app publisher. I hail from the great state of South Carolina, where I graduated from Clemson University. Go Tigers. And my friend, Eric Gaudette, multi-instrumentalist, songwriter, and performer, graduate of Boston Conservatory, right here in town. So, I guess we should get started. This is season 1 of Coda. During this season, we will learn how to create an Alexa skill. If you're like me, you have an Alexa in your house, and not just one Alexa, but probably about a half a dozen Alexas around your house. And if you're like me, a developer, you probably want to know how to control your Alexa. So we're going to learn how to do that this season in Coda. And specifically, we're going to learn how to create an Alexa skill that dictates posts from a Teams conversation. So if you're like me, you use Microsoft Teams just about on a daily basis. And we are using Teams tonight, actually, to broadcast audio and video for Coda. You can see here in our season 1 abstract, we will have 5 episodes. So each Sunday night for this week and the next 4 weeks, we will have an episode, lasts about 30 to 45 minutes, and we'll go through the details of creating an Alexa skill, testing and debugging that skill, and deploying that live to production. Here's a technical specification for episode 1. In today's episode, we'll have a little bit of an introduction to Coda. And basically, the gist of tonight's episode is we're going to create a new project in Visual Studio, deploy that project to Microsoft Azure, and connect that newly deployed web application to a newly built Alexa skill. We won't be doing much code
Sure.
today.
Skills.
Oh, hi.
Question of the day is one of the most
Okay,
used skills
Alexa,
this week.
stop please. Well, I should probably introduce our other guest for this evening. Alexa, how are you doing over there, Alexa?
I just worked out the ending to my latest story. That always feels nice.
I guess she's working on a story. Okay. Alexa, what time is it?
It's 9:35 p.m.
All right, well, we better get moving here. So let's get back to our technical specification for episode 1. As I was mentioning, we won't be doing much code today, but we will be setting up our environment so that we can create an Alexa skill and actually get Alexa to say what we want her to say. Okay, so an introduction to Coda and Coda. Why are we here today? So, a little backstory. A few months ago, I was originally supposed to present at an event called Teams Thursday New England. And for that presentation, I was going to teach people how to create an Alexa skill that accesses your Microsoft Teams conversations. Unfortunately, that event was postponed and then canceled, so we're all stuck at home. And since I had already created this presentation, I decided maybe I would share those slides with people and do a virtual presentation. But, just looking at slides and hearing somebody talk is a little bit boring, so I asked my friend Eric, hey, do you mind playing guitar while I do these slides? So that's what we've been working on for the past few weeks. And here we are with Coda and Coda. Plus, besides, of course, it gives me a reason to shave. You should have seen me before. And like Eric, who's a music teacher in Cambridge, I like to teach people new things. So here we are. Before we get started, let's listen to Eric for another second here. So for the first part of this episode, we're going to look at some slides, and we will create a new project in Visual Studio. For this exercise, we'll be using Visual Studio 2019. You can download the community version of Visual Studio for free. I prefer to use the latest version of Visual Studio. Of course, being a Microsoft product, it does connect with Microsoft Cloud pretty nicely. I know there's a lot of people out there that use Visual Studio Code. You can, of course, use Visual Studio Code or any other previous version of Visual Studio. It'll be just fine. So here we are in Visual Studio. We'll try and go through these slides really quick because it is just kind of a bunch of button clicks here. And if you've created a project in Visual Studio, this is nothing new to you. So what we're doing here is creating a new project, and we are creating an ASP.NET Core web application. The first thing Visual Studio asks is for a name of the project, so we can just give it any old name. Alexa skill will be just fine for this project.
Sorry, your device
Alexa,
does not have market.
excuse me.
Where should I get your news from?
Alexa,
You can say some.
stop please.
I didn't catch that. Where should I get your news from?
Alexa, please stop.
I can't find that. Instead,
Maybe I should
here's a
just
news
lower her
provider you
for
might
now.
like. Bloomberg Market Minute does not contain any recent content at the moment.
Well, we'll get back to Alexa in a little while. I guess it's going to be a little bit difficult to run this presentation saying the word Alexa and not have her think I'm talking to her. I was a little worried that might happen, but I also thought it would be pretty funny. So where were we? Okay, we're configuring a new project here. We give it the name Alexa Skill. And the next step in our web application creation is to select the type of web application. In this case, we're going to select an MVC app, Model View Controller app. And we won't be getting the full extent of the capabilities of an MVC application, but for this process, we'll just go ahead and create one. And after a few button clicks, you can see we have a new web application in Visual Studio. And if you want to test your new web application, you can of course just click on the play button at the top. And what you get running from your local host is a brand new MVC web application with all of the default content. Since we like to start with the blank canvas, what we're going to do is navigate through our new web application here and sort of clean it up a little bit, comment out some of the content that we don't need. And you can see that I've expanded the folder structure here. We're going to navigate through a few of these files. And if you're ever unsure of where to start, you can always start with the startup file, startup.cs. And so here we are in our brand new MVC application, which starts in the startup class. And after scrolling down, we'll find that the default controller and action for an MVC web application is going to be the home controller and the index action. So let's go find it. Well, here we are in our home controller and our index action, our index file. And you can see that we have here our default HTML content, which we can just go ahead and comment that out. Keep in mind, in an MVC application, our comments are created using an @ symbol and an asterisk. Let's find some other files to clean up before we continue. And if we look in another start file here, we see view start, which is referencing underscore layout. So that's another way we can find out how our application is running. Checking on some of these references here. And once we find our underscore layout file here in the a shared folder, what we need to do is go ahead and comment out all of the other default content that comes with creating a new MVC web application. And so again, we're using an @ symbol and an asterisk to start our comment all the way at the very top, and when we scroll down to the bottom, we close our comment with the asterisk and an @ symbol. But we do need to leave one final piece in here in our MVC application, which is a command called render body. And that's what we'll be calling our code behind. So we leave that. Once you get all of this default code commented out, we now have a clean slate, and you can go ahead and run the application one more time by clicking on the play button, and you can see that we now have a blank web application. So we've created a brand new project in Visual Studio. We've created an MVC.NET Core 3.1 web app. We've gone in through some of the default startup files, and we've cleaned out some of the default content that comes in an MVC web application, and basically all we want left is nothing but a blank screen, a blank web app. How you doing over there, Eric? Okay, let's get started with the next part here. Once you have your initial web application created, you have the default content commented out. Now we can start to think about publishing our web application to the cloud. And in order to do this, you will need to have a Microsoft Azure account. You can use your Office 365 account, and I haven't done this in a while, but you have a few options. You can create a developer's account. You can start a trial with Microsoft Azure. There are ways to sort of test this and not have to pay for any services from Azure. I do suggest that when you create resources in Azure that you do turn them off at night so that they're not running and costing you any extra charges. Also, be mindful that when you are creating these new resources that you select the free tier, by default, I've noticed that Azure will select a pay tier as a default option. So just make sure you're always looking for that free tier while you're in development so that you're not being charged. Alright, so when we are publishing our web application to Azure, we can right-click on our project, and you'll notice a window we can click on Publish, and that will bring up our Publish screen. The first time you do this, it's going to ask you to create a new service in Azure. So, just going through the motions, you will probably just be doing a bunch of button clicks and naming some things here. And here is an example of when you create a new hosting plan for your web service. The default that it gives you is the one core 1.75 gigabyte RAM option, which costs money. So you'll just want to go ahead and select the free option since we're just developing here. Once you create your new service in Azure, you'll see the publish summary and a brand new web application URL. This is also known as the endpoint for your web application. You can see here. You do get the HTTPS protocol with your web application, which is pretty standard nowadays. Most services won't allow you to create an endpoint that does not have the HTTPS endpoint. So, now that we've created our new service in Azure, if we were to click on that link, we would get the default service page. Because technically at this point, what we've done is we've created the service in Azure, we've created the web application in Azure. It's now running in the cloud, but we haven't yet deployed our code to the cloud yet. So what we do is one more time, if we go back and click on this publish button, then this screen will turn into your blank web application. You can notice in the top here, this is the URL to our new web app. And just like that, with a few button clicks, you're able to create a new project in Visual Studio, trim down some of the fat, and then publish your new blank web application to Azure so that other services like Amazon Alexa can utilize your new web application. And that's what we'll be doing next. Why don't we listen to Eric for a little while first? Sounds so good. All right, let's get to the last part here. We're finally going to go ahead and create and build our new Alexa skill. So what that means is we're going to go to the Amazon Developer Console. In this console, you will need to have an Amazon account, so you can use your own personal account that you have set up with your Alexa devices. If you use the account that you already have associated with your devices, then you can use those devices to do testing, but it's not necessary. And you can use the Amazon Developer Console to do all of your testing and debugging without even having a device. One more thing I should mention is that through this developer console, you can also invite others to join and help you test. So this is what the developer console first looks like when you go to developer.amazon.com. You can see. Zoom in here real quick. Let me zoom here first. We are going to developer.amazon.com, and what we are going to do is click on Alexa. We're going to create a new Alexa skill. And there's Alexa again. Sorry. Thought I turned her all the way down. So, again, this is not much code for today, but just to get us started, what we're going to do is navigate through this site so that we can create a brand new Alexa skill. And once you click on that, you'll click on one more button, which is the console button. And I think Alexa's still trying to talk to me. And once you click on the console, finally, you are taken to this address, which is something you'll get used to seeing. Here we are at developer.amazon.com/Alexa/console/ask. And so I would suggest favoriting that URL. When you first come to the developer console, you'll see that you do not have any existing skills yet, so go ahead and click on Create Skill. And we'll go ahead and give our skill a name. In this case, we can just call it Alexa Skill. There are some other options here that you can choose through, but for this exercise, we will create a custom skill, and if you scroll down the page, you'll see that we are going to provision our own backend. So that just means that we are going to use Azure to host our web service. And if you scroll back to the top of the screen and click on Create Skill, one more option that it asks you to select from, we will start from scratch. After you're done going through those button click motions, you'll see your skill dashboard. There's a few things we need to take care of here before we build our skill. So, while we are on the Amazon skill dashboard, there are a few things we need to set before we build the skill. The first thing we're going to do is take the website address of our new web application and set that as the endpoint so that our skill knows where to go to get information. We'll also take a quick look at what intents are with your skill. Basically, those are the actions that your skill takes and the requests that the skill sends to your web application. And once we're done with all of this, our newly built skill will send data in the form of a JSON request to your web application. So, back to our developer dashboard here. You can see that I've clicked on endpoint, and what we're doing here is selecting HTTPS as our endpoint type. And what we will do is take the URL from our web application. What we can do is navigate back to Visual Studio, and you can see right next to the web application URL is a little copy to clipboard button. Let's go ahead and copy that URL, bring that back to the skill dashboard, and paste that URL into the default region text box. And right below that text box, you're being asked to select the SSL certificate type. So again, that means the HTTPS protocol is in use here. And what we are telling Alexa is that our web application is being hosted on a subdomain of a domain that actually has a secure certificate. So you can see that our subdomain is called Alexa Skill 2020-053 in that number. And AzureWebsites.net is the endpoint that has the certificate for us. After you select the appropriate endpoint information, the next thing we'll go ahead and do is enter in our invocation phrase. The skill invocation name is what you will say to your Alexa device when you want to start your skill. So, even though you may have named your skill one thing, you can name your invocation phrase something else. So in this case, what we want to happen is for this app to start when we say code and Coda. So we've entered our endpoint. We've put in our invocation phrase. That's what's going to start our skill. The last thing we need to do before we can actually build the skill is set up one sample utterance. We'll get into what these intents and these utterances do a little bit more in the next episode. But for now, what we need to do is set up one to have as a default. So we're setting up the default help intent. And one utterance that we can include. An utterance is a word or a phrase that we think the user will say to start this intent. We can just put the word help. So what that means is when the user says help, our help intent will be fired. Of course, we'll get into that a lot more in the next episodes to come. But for now, just to get a sample Alexa skill built, this is the minimum that needs to be done. So when you click on Build, you'll click on Build here at the top, and you should get a success message after you build your skill. Once the skill is built, you can start testing your skill. It won't be doing much now, but one way to test the skill is to invoke your skill using the testing console. So, if you click on the test link at the top, you'll be taken to the testing console, and by default, testing is disabled for the skill. That's just by default for any new skill. So what you're going to want to do is, if you see test is disabled, you can go ahead and click on the drop down, and you can enable testing for development, for the development version of your skill. And this is all going to happen before we publish the skill. So, once you've enabled testing for your new skill, you can see that the testing dashboard is now allowing us to type in a command to this virtual Alexa device. So that's basically what we have here, is a virtual Alexa device that will help us test our code so that we don't need to use an actual real device. This just makes it a little bit easier. We'll use this a lot more in some of the episodes to come. But what we can do is type in the invocation code and Coda, and right now, since our web application is just blank, Alexa is telling us that there was a problem with the skill's response, and that's just because our web application is currently blank. Like I mentioned before, we will get into the Alexa skill building process a lot more in the episodes to come, but what you can see here is when you invoke your skill by saying your skill invocation phrase, this data here, this JSON formatted data, is what is sent to your web application. And so what your web application needs to do in return is send nicely formatted JSON text back. So what we'll do to finish off today's episode is we will configure our web application to respond with some simple text. Alright, we're almost done with episode 1 of Code and Coda. Let's finish off the initial project creation here. So what we're going to do is bounce back over to our new Visual Studio project, and instead of returning nothing, instead of returning a blank page. What we need to do is return some text, and it's pretty simple. If you navigate to your index file, you can see from before that the initial code in the index file was commented out, and now what we've done is we've added just basic text, and at a very minimum, what needs to happen is you send formatted in JSON formatting, a version, and a response object. Within that response object is another object called output speech. Within the output speech object, we have properties or fields. One is type, and the other is text. We'll get into how we can get real creative with some of this text, because you can send HTML formatted text, which would include tags for changing Alexa's emotion and the way that she will respond and how she says things. But for now, we're just going to send some plain text and a little message that says, "Hello world." So once we update our index file just with some basic text, we go ahead back to our publish screen and click on the publish button one more time. Once that is published, you'll see the web browser shows us that we're now returning nicely formatted text. So, what's going to happen now when we go back to our developer console, to the testing dashboard? If we type in the skill invocation code in Coda, now you can see we get a message returned, and Alexa will say, "Hello world." If we scroll over here to the right, you can see before the output was blank, but now we are getting the JSON text. So I know it's not a lot of code for today, but that does finish today's episode. This will be archived on YouTube, so if you missed any part and need to go back to see how something was done, you can check out the archive. Get yourself set up in time for next episode, episode 2, next Sunday night. We'll be talking about the request that Alexa sends to your web application, the types of intents and actions that your skill will take. I'll show you how to parse that JSON data in your .NET Core 3.1 application. There are some new ways to do this. And we'll republish that web application to Azure, continue our testing. But until next time, I hope everybody had a good time tonight. Notice we had about 12 people in the waiting room, so hope to see y'all again next week. And thank you, Eric Gaudette, for playing this evening. It makes my job a lot easier. And until next week. Thanks for coming.